Hello and welcome to another day of English 2. I'm your online teacher, Miss Abear. We have been doing some research on the fashion industry from the past to the present and looking at how this utopian society handled, or this idea of a utopian society handled this fashion industry and these mills and these ideas and these ideologies that kind of followed. And are we still kind of in that idea of that mill that Frances Cabot Lowell first envisioned? And I know that you guys have put forth a lot of effort, and I'm very proud of the work that you've been doing. We still have a little while to go though. So as a reminder, this is a Common Lit 360 curriculum. It is their Unit 4, and the title is The Fashion Industry from Past to Present. And our research question for this unit that you should be very familiar with is the idea that Frances Cabot Lowell had this utopian vision for a factory that would make profits for the owners while also improving the lives of the workers. What was that vision? And then to what extent has his vision been realized since its inception? And we have already read several texts kind of about this idea and where this is going, and really what these mill workers thought about this idea as well. Today we are going to read more letters from mill girls. This is part 2. You guys read part 1 several lessons ago, and so we're going to continue that. Now this is in the curriculum, its own separate packet, so hopefully your teachers will have printed it. When you get ready to write your research, you do need to differentiate between part 1 and part 2 if you use any of those quotes. All right, so the setting for today's story. Today we're going to read letters written by Mary Paul. So kind of keep that. Remember, we asked, one of those questions that we asked when we were reading primary sources is, who is the author, right? So the author of this one is Mary Paul, and we're going to be looking at the changing times in Lowell. So the Lowell system was so efficient that the mills were soon making more cloth than anyone had ever dreamed possible. And look at that chart on your board. In 1815, 81 million yards of cloth were produced. And then just a couple of short years later, 16 years later, 230 million. That is more than double, almost triple the amount that was produced. I don't think anybody ever imagined that that was possible. So 16 years, tripled. But the Lowell system mills increased the supply of this cotton cloth so much that prices dropped drastically. Ooh, I saw some light bulb moments going off in some of you. Good. I want you to think about, if the price of an item is dropping, how might that affect profits? Think about that before you raise your hand, and then your teacher will call on you to share some of your responses. Those were some great ideas, and I love this idea that some of you had that kind of goes back and forth looking at today's industry, and some of you have used some context from some of your previous classes, and you were talking about profits, and you were talking about supply and demand. I loved hearing that phrase because that means that you are connecting what you're learning today to what you've learned in other classes. Great job. So let's look at kind of those changing times in Lowell. So events overseas in Ireland would soon impact the situation that was happening in Lowell. From 1845 to 1849, Ireland was struck by a disaster known as the Great Hunger. It was a period of mass starvation and disease. Most people in Ireland owned small farms from English landlords, or they rented them, but they survived on a diet of potatoes, and they ate almost nothing else. So what do we know about a society that they start starvation, right? They look to leave. Okay, we're going to get to that in a second, but kind of think about that as we move along. When a blight or a disease killed the potatoes in 1845, the people started to starve. So if potatoes were their only means of survival, and then all of a sudden disease had killed most of this potato crop, then you've got a large amount of the population who starved to death. And some of them, before they starved to death, they gathered their families and they immigrated to the United States. Desperate to survive, they were willing to work for very low wages. Now, how do you think the arrival of the Irish immigrants affected that situation in Lowell? So you raise your hand and share your answers. Great job. I loved hearing some of your thought processes go through. I love that a lot. So as we're reading today, I want you to be annotating this text and thinking about the point of view or the purpose. So anytime we are reading a primary text, we are reading and looking at those questions that we needed to ask, right? Okay, you should have those out on your desk, and we're going to review those in a second. These are primary documents, right? First-hand accounts in the form of letters. So those questions that we need to ask when we are reading a primary source or studying a primary source: who created this artifact? I need somebody to answer that out loud because we already answered that. Great, I heard that name, Mary Paul. If you did not write her name down, write her name down. Good. Now, who is the intended audience for the artifact? As we read, I want you to be thinking about who the intended audience was. And lastly, how did the context most likely affect the content of the artifact? So always be thinking about those when we are studying primary sources. Now it is time for you to read independently these letters written by Mary. So I'm going to pause here and give you time to read independently this text. Remember also to answer the questions in the margins. Great job. Now it is time for you to continue working independently and answer those text-dependent questions at the end of your text. Fantastic job. I love the way your focus was, and some of you were going back to your text, kind of flipping back and forth. Fantastic job. Now you have an opportunity to talk about what you've learned. So you have some partner discussion questions from this text. So I'm going to give you a minute to work with a partner and answer those questions. Fantastic job. Today, we are not going to go into the research questions. We're going to work on that the next time that we meet. So that's all that I have for you today. Until next time, happy learning.